who truly then governs African waters? Is it the state? Is it corporations or is it foreign navies? Governance is about building community. Welcome to StrangersX, the podcast where we explore power, policy, and the people remaking the world from the margins. I'm Zainab Taonga Chirwa, and in this space, we hold conversations with thinkers, doers, and dreamers across the global majority who are challenging old systems and imagining new ones. In today's episode of Strangers X, I'll be speaking with maritime security researcher David Willima from the Institute for Security Studies. We discuss how Africa's coastal cities are facing growing insecurity, the opportunities and challenges in the blue economy, and how the BBNJ Treaty intersects with African sovereignty and digital infrastructure. Whether you're deep in governance work or just curious about how change happens, this one's for you. Let's dive in. Hi, David. Welcome to Strangers X, and thank you so much for accepting the invite.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I'm excited to be a part of the podcast first. Congratulations on that. And then it's also just a conversation that I'm deeply passionate about, obviously. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. I must say, very much a full circle moment. We first met in undergrad at Rhodes University, or the university currently known as Rhodes University, and we're very just really young, passionate people around about Africa and particularly Africa's development, and it's always really exciting. And I think reaffirming seeing how when you meet people who have been along the journey, especially from the beginning, and seeing that people are committed to the cause and doing the work. So congratulations, and it really is a pleasure having you on the show. Um, so firstly, I want to ask, right, as in you're Zambian, you come from a landlocked
Yes.
country, and here you are being an expert in maritime security, being super passionate about it as well. How did that happen?
Yeah, firstly, also full circle moment. It's like I'm beaming right now and smiling because we would, sit outside the library talking about
Mm,
all of these things without a clear path on how we would be a part of this change, right, in advancing the
true.
continent.
Hmm.
And here we are, right, in our own little spaces and corners doing the work. So yeah, really happy about that. And then just getting back to the question, rightly put, I am Zambian. And I wish I would say there was like an elaborate plan to end up here, but it started again at Rhodes in those years trying to figure out what to do. Just know I'm deeply passionate about the continent and advancing the African cause. And so as well as just the intersection between natural resource governance and politics and people and all of those things. I was then approached during my honors by the Environmental Learning and Research Center at Rhodes. They were running a program called One Ocean Hub, and they basically needed a research assistant with an international relations perspective to ocean governance. I had not done any marine biology, any type of work connected to the ocean at that point, beyond just, high school geography and just knowing a little bit of this and that. Challenged myself, did that for 9 months, I believe, and just fell in love with the ocean, never looked back. And yeah, just approached it from that angle. And then I joined the ISS in 2021. And then from there, it's just been um, an unlocking of a lot of things and opportunities. I was selected as one of 28 global youths to address the Our Ocean conference in Palau
Nice.
in 2022, just a few months
Wow.
into the job. And that happened, and it opened so many doors, and I've just been deeply involved in it. And then also, it just, for me, it shows that being from a landlocked country, a landlinked country, as we'd like to call it, is not a hindrance
Mm,
to doing this work, because we all depend on the ocean for our survival in a literal sense,
Mm,
um, but as well as the rights that landlocked countries have under the United Nations Law of the Sea for usage, passage through the ocean under the freedom of the seas to do the imports and export through transit coastal states.
mhm.
And in this case is a very, very good example.
Wow, I mean, that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that journey. It's always really, I think it's always valuable for people to hear people's journeys in terms of what brought them or what led them to where they are right now, especially when we're living in a very different and fast changing world, especially when it comes to careers, and just thinking about, one's journey or thought process around, what to pursue, how to pursue, and, our approach to things. So I think that's a really the fact that you are, very open to this new thing and lend an expertise that you already were developing with your IR background, your international relations background, to something that was new, and then you see these, really amazing opportunities that end up opening up, that still speak to your general purpose and what has driven you so far. So that's really amazing and incredible. You spoke about it. I mean, towards the end there, you mentioned exports, imports, exports, and immediately I'm thinking about ports. I recently read an African Union report that last year the blue economy raised around what is it? Around $24 billion in terms of across the continent, and contributed to about 1.26% GDP of the continent. I mean, it may seem small in terms of 1.26, but that's still a lot of money, especially when we look at the projections that the AU is trying to work towards in 2030, which is to leapfrog from 24 billion to about $405 billion. I mean, that's massive, massive improvement, and we can only just begin to imagine how much that could assist in development efforts for different African countries. What should African governments think about and prioritize when they design their governance structures around their blue economies?
Thanks, Zane. So you started on a very good note. The figure that you gave, I believe, is for related to our blue economy as it relates to ports, right?
Yes.
But overall, I think it's valued at just over 300 billion rather USD, right? And the plans that are there, the projections are that by 2030, which is interestingly just 5 years from now, crazy,
Yeah.
um, to about 450 ballpark figure. And the potential that it has is way more than that, because we are, if you look at the continent, it's large, so we don't think of it this way, but it is just a large island,
Mm-hmm.
right? It
Mm-hmm.
sits large island. We've got 13 million square kilometers of combined coastal zones.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow.
that is a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of maritime zones, and we've got 38 coastal countries, 16 landlocked, and then we've got vast inland waterways, which, according to the way we look at the big blue economy from an African perspective, encompasses all those waterways as well. So you got Nile, the Great Lakes region, the Zambezi, the Congo River, and so on and so forth. And so, how do we then tap into that potential for development? And then at the same time, we are one of the regions in the world that is most disproportionately affected by climate change. And so, how do we, and which is then the going back to the inception or the concept of the blue economy comes from the principles of the green economy, and this is at the sustainability conference in Rio de Janeiro in 2012, where island states were like, look, we get it, green economy is great, but our context is a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have the green elements, but we're blue nations. We're surrounded by water. So, how do we then have an approach to the way we use our oceans in a way that is sustainable, that balances economic growth and environmental sustainability, so that these resources can be their generations to come, because they don't belong to this current generation only. And so those are the foundational sort of principles of the blue economy to balance economic growth with environmental sustainability. So using our blue resources in a manner that is sustainable and responsible, is inclusive and equitable, to ensure that everybody benefits from these resources, because they don't belong to Zain or David that is sitting in government only for those 5-10 years. And so we've been a bit late to the game,
Mm-hmm.
but the knowledge has been there, because we've used these resources for generations, right? Life um sort of began along these coastal
Awesome.
areas
Yeah.
and so there's indigenous knowledge systems about how to take care of the ocean, and pretty much boils down to looking at these resources as interconnected to our own being,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no separation. We're not separated from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so those kind of principles, looking at from an African perspective, but as well as other regions where we share similar worldviews, the Pacific Islands, kind of the same context. They look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
They even have a concept of the seventh generation
Mm-hmm.
in saying decisions that we make now should factor in what impact those will have by the seventh generation from now,
Wow.
right? And which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a governance perspective, then the African Union developed its AU Blue Economy Strategy in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have also the Africa Integrated Maritime Strategy, which looks at blue economy elements, maritime security elements, and other things. That's in 2015. And then there's the Lome Charter, which is maritime transport, all these integrated aspects of the ocean space, right? And so the challenge then has been how to localize those ambitious frameworks to national context and regional context. There is there is advancement in that, but it's not enough. I can't tell you right now, top of my head, how many countries have developed national blue economy strategies, but they're not a lot, and certainly not all 38 of the coastal states. Landlinked nations such as Zambia, for example, have developed their blue economy strategies, which is quite impressive given that it has so much freshwater potential. And then its centrality as well, equidistant from the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. We have to strategically thinking have to start thinking about those aspects as well, right? In where we envision Africa 2043,
Mm-hmm.
2060, which is why this features as well in Agenda 2063. So yeah, not to stay on this long, but that's kind of the thinking that we should take. Apply or develop blue economy strategies that ensure that they are equitable, there is inclusion, and has a good balance of the economic growth aspect
Mm-hmm.
and environmental sustainability.
Where exactly are African countries losing the most economic value today? And I think it's important that we actually link this to. I really liked what you mentioned here around our relationship with water and indigenous knowledge. Sorry, how essentially what we've always understood our relationship with the ocean, or just water
Mm.
bodies, or even just the land, right?
Yeah, that is, it's quite a loaded question, and it has many angles, right? The one thing that I wanted to pick up on is, starting from our relationship with the ocean, I think an often neglected reality as well is the potential that the blue economy has, or the maritime sector has, for the continent is a bit unrecognized on multiple levels. From a policy perspective, uh, we have this thing we call sea blindness, which is just a lack of recognition of the importance of the ocean space for development, for security, for so many things. Um, and I think previously when we were chatting, we're speaking about the recent remarks that the South African
Maybe.
chief of the Navy gave, basically crying, not crying, but like um,
Lamenting.
pointing, yeah, pointing to the realities
Yes.
of the lack of budget allocation
Mm.
to the Navy, right? And that is not unique to South Africa, it's across the continent, some countries better than others. But also, from a people perspective as well, I think those of us that usually are inland in the cities and whatnot, even people like you'd be surprised, have been to a country like Seychelles. You
Mhm.
ask young people um, why, or if they would work in the ocean sector, they only think you can only be a fisherman, right?
Mm.
Or just like fisheries. And those are often looked down upon sectors, a dirty job, things like that. And so the potential that it has, and there's so many opportunities. But as well as I think there's a cognitive sort of collective trauma that we have given the history
Water.
that African people have with the ocean, right?
True, true.
And and that is a good starting point, just recognizing that. And so from there, how can we develop these massive coastal spaces that we have into development hubs? It's already happening, coastal tourism, sports, aquaculture, and things like that. And so it requires for me certain interventions at a policy level
Mhm.
that will then translate to a requisite funding that is required to develop these sectors. Um, and then secondly, because of that lack of funding, I mean, these are vast areas, right? If we're comparing Africa's landmass, which is huge, our combined as a continent ocean space is 3 times our landmass.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
insane. Hmm.
that is hectic stuff,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that shows you then that there's not one country that has the capabilities to
Do it alone.
um, enforce and
Hmm.
survey these spaces.
Hmm.
It's just not practical
Hmm.
at present. I don't think even the United States can do it
Hmm.
uh, with their big budgets.
Hmm.
And so from that reality, the one number one thing, I mean, it used for many years, early 2008, 9 late to about 2019, 2020 there, it was piracy, right?
Hmm.
It's been piracy, and it's the one hook that, if you want to get people to realize that some of the risks that happen in this space, you speak about piracy and
True.
everybody
True.
in a way gets it,
Yeah.
right?
People just
Oh,
think piracy, the Horn of Africa, and
yes, yes, yes,
just
yes.
yeah, yeah,
Jack Sparrow,
yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean
Yeah.
type of thing.
True.
And even that as has its own context in the
Hmm.
African space, right? And so, but the number one threat that we have now is illegal, unreported, and
Unregulated.
unregulated fishing.
Hmm.
And this is because we don't have the capacity to enforce security, maritime security effectively in our ocean spaces. And so you have foreign large fishing vessels that come into our waters and plunder our resources.
Hmm.
The continent loses about up to 11 billion US dollars per
Wow.
year
Hmm.
from this one aspect of crime at sea,
Sure.
from IUU fishing, right?
Okay.
And that translates to beyond the monetary value. If you couple that with things like climate change, warming temperatures, warming sea temperatures that disturb or reconfigure
Hmm.
the migration of fish because they don't have passports, they can just go anywhere. Um, So then coastal communities, it means it's a loss of food security,
for them?
it's a it's a loss of income, it's a loss of livelihoods because these are multi-generational fisher folk, right, that depend on these resources. And then there's also, it's quite loaded because there's gendered elements to that as
Yes.
well. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, the men predominantly might be at sea, but the processing is done by
By
women.
women. Hmm.
And yeah,
And you see this
so all,
especially at ports,
yeah,
more so, all the gutting, the
yes,
selling of it at markets, etc., is
absolutely,
very much done by women.
absolutely.
You essentially, I think I really like how you brought those together, of really bringing in
Yeah.
the sovereignty and security element of this
Mm,
conversation, as well as the development aspect of it, because I really liked that statistic that you just shared of, just for us to get an understanding of how massive our coastline is
mm,
across the continent, and that it's not feasible to expect one particular country to be able to
mm,
do it significant. I mean, no country can or would be able to legally do it on their own for the whole continent. But even
mm.
just for their own continent, like let's say, for
For their
instance,
own
South Africa
waters. Yeah.
here for their own waters. So, for instance, we're in South Africa, so we can situate this conversation in South
Yeah.
Africa, where it has quite a massive coastline, both along
Mm.
the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean. It has a very
And the
busy
Southern
gateway,
Ocean.
and the Southern Ocean. Yes, exactly. Has
Mm.
the Cape of Good Hope, which is the Southern Ocean, which is
Yeah.
a massive gateway, especially now with ongoing geopolitical conflict that's happening, and that has and insecurity that's happening in the Red Sea, basically on the Horn of Africa,
Yeah.
which has forced a lot of transporting to
Shipping
be done,
traffic
shipping to
rerouting. Yeah.
travel, yes, around the Horn, right? And how we haven't fully been able to leverage that for the economy, for the South African economy, and beyond. But even
Mm.
like you mentioned, the comments that were made by the Vice Admiral of the South African Navy, Vice Admiral Monde Lobese, about underfunding and what that
Mm.
means for the South African National Defense Force, right? Again,
Mm.
going back to this question around, I think bring in this question around sovereignty, and we know that if a country is not properly secured, and
Mm.
for a country as with such a massive coastline, and then the ocean being very much a big part of South Africa's national security, this is very
Mm.
concerning. And
Yeah.
South Africa being the biggest economy on the continent, not being able to fund its navy adequately, that's a concern.
Mm.
But we do have something called the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which
Mm.
allows for inter-African coordination and trade, not just not just within trade, but just across different sectors, right, of African governance. And I guess then my
Mm.
question here is, how can we leverage the AfCFTA to harmonize maritime regulations and value chains to strengthen our national sovereignties and securities?
I mean, there is progress that has been made. Like I said, we've got some frameworks that have been put in place. The Lomé Charter comes to mind, except then, so the framework exists, but for it to be implemented, it has to reach the threshold of ratifications for it to come into force.
May I ask, like,
Um, yeah.
what does the Lomé Charter actually establish?
The Lemay Charter is this is the African Charter on Maritime Security, Safety, and Development. So it then incorporates the holistic aspects of the conversation that we're having, the transport side, which would then be linked to the after, the development side, plus the security elements
Mhm.
as well. So it's a holistic approach to how we approach maritime governance in the African context. But that requires 15 ratifications for it to come into force. Last I checked, this year we're only on 3,
Oh
and
gosh.
this has been in place for close to a decade now, if not more.
I mean,
So
yeah.
yes,
This seems to be a
those are
trend
the
because it was a
challenges.
similar thing with AfTA as well, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
finally met that threshold of 15, more than 15 countries. I mean, we're
Yeah.
almost at full capacity now with AfTA, but it took such a long time. And even in terms of
It took such a
operationalizing
long
it,
time.
actually, it's
Yeah.
still taking quite a long time. And I think when it comes to sovereignty and issues around sovereignty, maybe for those just to give more context, what we mean by sovereignty, in that, ultimately every country has the powers to be able to determine and to dictate what happens within its national borders, within its
Mm,
jurisdiction, and to be free from any outside interference within its national borders. And so when you have a security weakness, such as not being able to secure your oceans, for instance,
mhm.
it then threatens a country's. This is one of the things that threatens a
It
country's
does.
sovereignty. And
Or
then I guess
region.
who truly then governs African waters? Is it the state?
Mm,
Is it corporations or is it foreign navies? And I ask
mm,
this because,
mm, mm,
when we go to the ocean, whether you're in Durban, whether you're in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam, whether you're in Cote d'Ivoire, you are in Mombasa, you see these
mm,
massive ships coming in from all these Scandinavian countries and from the Far
mm,
East and from the US and from everywhere, right?
mm.
Transporting, and you can see a lot of things being brought to the port. It makes you wonder, this is clearly of value, and this has been happening for centuries, right?
Yeah.
It then matters who governs this. This speaks as not just to security, but even from a development point of view, as to are we fully able to leverage this resource that is taking place on our shores.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the biggest question, right? So there is no way, in my mind at least, that AfTA works if as effectively as we want it to without the maritime sector,
Mm,
without the development of our blue economies, without putting in cabotage regimes or maritime safety measures that I think you've seen it already, especially with our inland waters where there's an accident on the Congo River,
yes.
100 people die, goods are down and whatnot. And that is just those vessels should not be
In the
moving,
waters.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not safe to, but we haven't taken it seriously enough to put in measures to one, ensure that safety standards are adhered to, and secondly, that the security element of these issues is considered um, very critically.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get to the question of who truly governs our waters, but in so doing, in the after context, progress in one country can be hindered by lack of progress in another, especially because the nature of maritime crime is often transnational,
Mm-hmm.
and so that is why there is that sort of ripple effect. And so a regional sort of approach to it is important that all countries get on board, firstly, to make after work, but as well as to ensure that our sovereignty is protected so that we don't have a drags coming into if they get into Mozambique, for example, they get into South Africa. It's as easy as that.
Sure.
So those are kind of the things that need to be put in place or thought about thoroughly. And there are sort of good examples where the South African Navy will hold joint naval exercises with
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania and Mozambique. And we've been working for quite some time now with the Nigerian Navy as well as navies in the Gulf of Guinea to sort of support the creation of this thing called the Combined Maritime Task Force of the Gulf of Guinea, which is basically a recognition that, in answering your question, we need to take ownership of the security and governance of our own waters
Mm-hmm.
because other countries, like you're saying, foreign countries and entities, multinational have their own interests and agendas, and
Yes.
you cannot blame them. That will continue to be the case
Mm-hmm.
for as long as we're not taking ownership of it. You
Mm-hmm.
see it in because of this, the concept of the freedom of the seas, right? Countries are free to use the seas to transport goods,
Mm-hmm.
etc. The Gulf of Aden, for example, is strategically important to
Yes.
global shipping.
This is along the eastern coast. This is what is often referred to as the
Yeah,
Horn, the Red Sea.
yes,
Yes, that
yes.
region.
That area is critically important to global trade.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why you see a country like Djibouti, for example,
Mm-hmm.
housing 5 naval
I
bases from
mean,
China, the US,
talk about sovereign
France,
security.
and
Mm.
others. Exactly. So then the problem with that though is, and we see that in that space in the Gulf of Guinea as well, when say a government changes, there's a government change in a
Within the
Western
country.
country,
Mm-hmm.
and it has that country has different priorities,
Now,
and funding security in the Gulf of Guinea is not one of them.
priority.
Then there's a gap, right?
Sure.
There's a clear example right now
Mm.
with the way um, the Red Sea then became a flashpoint,
Yes.
a risk to global trade. All the resources, the foreign naval resources that were in off the coast of Somalia,
Mm-hmm.
patrolling that area, fighting piracy, were deployed to the Red Sea. That leaves insecurity in that area. And
Yes.
because those countries, African countries, they don't take ownership of their own security
Mm-hmm.
situation, what do we see? We've seen a what is being called a resurgence of piracy attacks,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because on one end, we only focus on the naval aspect of securing those waters,
Mm-hmm.
and the provision of that security was not by African states.
No,
And then at the same time, it's linked to, which is why we always say what happens on land affects
the
what
ocean.
happens at the sea.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't dealt with the root causes of piracy,
Mm-hmm.
which
I was going to say the
historically
people and just the
the
social
people.
dynamics. Yeah.
Yes, the social dynamics, which is context specific, but then can be related to in the past, where this foreign, we're speaking about illegal fishing, they come
Yes.
and plunder the fish.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are multi-generational fisher folk. It's
This is
all
all
the
they
skill
know.
that they know.
Mm-hmm.
So they saw themselves as defending what belongs to them, right?
Absolutely. And this is their
Yeah,
home and this is their land, right?
and this is even
Yes.
now when you speak to them, a colleague of mine gave me a word. They don't call themselves pirates. They call themselves a local word that I've forgotten, but I remember what it means. It means um, protectors, or like the Coast Guard, basically,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think
which
let's
means,
sorry.
yeah,
I
okay.
really like where this conversation is going. I think you're raising a very important conversation around the power of narrative, naming, and naming. And I think it's very
Mm,
much closely linked to this question around who truly governs African waters. Because
yeah.
when we keep referring to people who are simply inhabitants trying to survive, this is all they've known across generations. They are trying to protect what is theirs because this is their
Mhm.
generation intergenerational home and legacy, and and
Yeah.
that's all they know. And like you said, they are protectors. But
Mm,
because the people who dominate and who drive this narrative, it is not in their interest to recognize their legitimacy. We then refer to these
mm,
people as thieves, and yet they live
mm,
there, and yet the
mm,
navy forces that are there are not from there. So who then
mm.
is the insider and who is the outsider? I think,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
around conversation around decolonial reconstruction around these
Yep.
conversations,
Yep.
and even just power dynamics. And as Africans, I think it's really, really important as well just to share. So really, I really appreciate
It's it's
your
it's
your your
so
your inclusion
important.
of this conversation and to name it as well. I think
Yeah.
it's just so beautiful.
It's so important because, I mean, piracy by definition only happens in the high seas, right? Which are outside national waters.
Hmm.
So then in that case, for me, it's we haven't given enough recognition of the root causes of that those maritime crimes, whether we call it piracy, whether it's just an attack on something, or
Hmm.
theft or whatever. um it won't be resolved only by the deployment of naval forces,
Mm.
right? It has its place and it has been very effective, but the reason there is a resurgence now, as it's being called, is because we have neglected the root causes. So then, right, in the case of Somalia, for example, is how do you develop then blue economies that are inclusive of those people, right? Because then you're giving them livelihoods in the space that they call home. They are still guardians of the ocean and they are thriving. And in the same breath, they're also contributing to climate action. But that is, I think, a process that would take some time. There is recognition of these facts, conversations happening. But yeah, how effective that becomes in terms of implementation, we have to wait and see.
No, I was just, thank you for that. I was just looking into the word, for
Mm.
protectors of the sea, and it's
Yeah.
Bada Dinta Bada. I
Yes.
hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Probably, I'm
I
most
I
probably
hope you
not.
are.
I'm most probably not. But if there are any
Yeah.
Somalis in the audience, so please do correct and teach us in the comments.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. I think and if there's anyone out there who'd love to just come and share their insights and from the
Absolutely.
community who are working in the sector, I'd love to bring you
Mhm.
onto the podcast and for you to just
I
share what's
Zane,
going on.
just on
Yes,
that note, right? I have colleagues from our East African office
nice,
that went to the field. They went to Somalia to do some
nice.
field work.
Uh-huh.
And it was so interesting that so we're having a conversation now about IUU fishing, right?
Mm.
They say the problem that they have more than IUU fishing is actually legal, unreported, and undocumented fishing,
Ooh.
where sort of
So it's not
licensing is
IUU but
given.
LUU.
It's not illegal
It's
because the
legal.
government actually gives licenses
Ah,
to these big foreign
yes,
entities
yes.
that come to fish in their waters
And
and
dump.
neglect the
Yeah.
local people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then it's like, okay, so if you fight against that, then you get thrown in prison.
Ooh.
So you've basically essentially as a government created illegality.
Legitimized. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. You've
legitimized
legitimized it.
crime,
Yeah.
in a sense. And you see that as well in the South African context, and
Mm-hmm.
which is why the environmental conversation is also a tricky one, because in South Africa, it's tied to, colonial and apartheid sort of era uh, governance systems of
Yes.
these areas
Mm-hmm.
where, and then now post-apartheid, the creation of MPAs, marine protected areas, meant
Yes.
that those locals who were kicked off their land now cannot go into those areas to fish,
Sure.
right? And then they start poaching.
Mm,
You've
mm,
created illegality.
literally. Mm-hmm. So
So
yeah.
it's you
Legal
see this,
illegality.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you see this coming out in different parts of, and you see this again in the Gulf of Guinea context,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where certain people are kicked off certain aspects of the land or coastal areas for the development of oil fields and things like that without compensation. And then when now they are vulnerable or prone to recruitment from Boko Haram or whatever group, and then insecurity is perpetrated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one.
And it really does lend to the whole conversation around the treaty, the BBNG treaty, or the biodiversity beyond national
Mm,
jurisdiction, right? Because what is happening is that people have been relying on this international law rule that a country only has jurisdiction up to a certain mandated point, after which
mm,
those are the high seas. It's basically free for all, and anyone can do whatever they want to do. But like you said, fish do not have passports. There are no
passports.
borders. And so
Yeah,
water, fish, biodiversity really is interlinked, and the different
yeah,
oceans current, if you all know, if you're just familiar with how geography works and how
yeah,
marine biology works just in general, you understand
yeah.
how everything is interconnected. It's a really an interconnected ecosystem across the globe, right? So I
Mm,
guess,
mm.
the question, my question then here is around the treaty, the beyond biodiversity national beyond sorry biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction treaty. What is the treaty
Mm.
about, and what was it trying to serve? Maybe just to first set the context for this conversation in the context of global governance, and then what does it mean for African maritime security?
Yeah, so you are right. in recognizing firstly that the ocean is an interconnected ecosystem. We often say this, there's the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic, the Indian, but it really is one connection, one ocean. Those are ocean regions, and in our human conceptual way, it makes sense. But it really is one ocean,
Mm.
right? And so even with, I'm going to get back to this point now, why this is important. With in the past, right, where ocean governance is concerned, I think we often look at Africa as maybe not having contributed to the global ocean governance regime as we know it. Not true. Even the creation of the concept of EEZs, exclusive
Yes.
economic zones, or in a manner of speaking, our coastal waters, our national waters. It was very much pioneered and led firstly by countries in the Pacific, fearing that those countries, who we can name or not name, with bigger technologies of vessels, to go long
Budget.
distances would go and plunder fisheries resources,
Mm-hmm.
and no one gets to benefit, only them, right? And so from that legacy, African legal scholars, Professor Frank Njega from Kenya, and I forgot the other one's name, from Tanzania, really pushed for the development of the concept of the EEZs. And it was basically to protect Africa's interests
Mm-hmm.
in this space, because there was a rush, right? Almost, and it was happening during the colonial era, T60s,
Mm-hmm.
where now we're,
The
it was
decolonial, a
almost
quote unquote
yes,
decolonial era when
the
country,
colonial
yeah, yes.
space. Yeah. So we saw it, we being, from an African perspective,
Mm-hmm.
saw it as being synonymous to the colonial rush for minerals,
Yes.
because it also meant that those countries with bigger technologies can plunder all these resources for their own benefit,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of us can just, I guess, watch. And we see it playing out even today. So that is the legacy of Africa's contribution to even the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, which then delineated these coastal waters, the ocean having borders basically to the high seas or international waters, which, like you say, essentially means because they belong to all of us, they don't belong to one particular nation. And so for a long time, that meant that under the principle of the freedom of the seas, that any nation, whichever wants to, can go and do anything in that space, absolutely anything. So there was dumping of illegal waste, there was dumping of um, nuclear waste in the
Wow.
ocean, and all sorts of things, as well as just unregulated plundering
Mm-hmm.
of anything that you want to pick from the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And so the BBNJ Treaty, after 20 years of negotiations,
That's a
right?
long time.
And
Mm-hmm.
it took that long because there are sticky points.
Of course.
There are
People have a lot
nations
to lose, you know?
to lose,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
If we decide now we have one internationally binding legal framework to
Mm.
protect the
Oh,
high seas,
yes.
that's what it's there to do. And it doesn't replace, because there are other frameworks that exist, but it brings them together,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if it's shipping, if it's equitable benefit sharing or
Mm-hmm.
technology transfer,
Yes.
because that is also important.
Mm-hmm.
Technology transfer, which African negotiators really pushed for, and which was a sticky point, right? For certain countries that didn't want to do that, or how to use marine genetic resources in
That's a big one. I
pharmaceuticals,
know
for
that was a very big
example.
one. Mm-hmm. Could you perhaps
That
maybe
was a
just
big
expand
one.
on that? What is marine genetic resources for the
So these
audience?
are a resource. I mean, I'm not a marine biologist, so I'm gonna put it in very layman's terms.
Sure.
These are resources found in the ocean or marine areas that can be used
In
in
pharmaceuticals.
pharmaceuticals,
Mm.
basically. And there's like amazing discoveries that are
Mm.
being made.
Mm.
we still only know we've only mapped about 5% to the ocean. So
Yeah.
we don't know enough about the ocean to even decide to exploit without
Yeah.
regulation, because we don't even know if we exploit a certain way, if they can recover, right? And how long, because also these ecosystems take centuries to build, right? So you don't know what damage you're doing. And because, like you were saying, the interconnection between our climate or environmental context with the health of the ocean is um, very linked. And so the BBNJ comes in then to sort of harmonize all these existing frameworks to have one legally binding framework to protect marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is the high
I
seas or
see.
international waters. Um, and so, yeah, 20 years of negotiation. It was finally adopted in 2023. And between that time and now, it's been a process of getting the required ratifications for it to come into force, which was 60. And in record time, we got to 60 by September this year.
That's
And
incredible.
then it required a lot of work. And then so props to the African group of negotiators for really advancing the principle, the common heritage of humankind, which says this is all our resources. We cannot have certain countries simply because they have better technology, whatever, to exploit everything, without recognizing that this is a shared resources, but also recognizing that future generations need to depend on these very resources. And so got to 60. It's probably in the 70s at the moment in terms of
Yes.
ratifications.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite low from the African perspective to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
We're now, I think, just less than 20, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
not mistaken,
Why is that?
ratifications.
Yes, I'm saying
And
why
that's,
is that?
oh,
Why
why is that? It's all the things that we've spoken about,
sea
right? Just
blindness?
sea blindness, but also in some parts, also a fear of, oh my God, we cannot even patrol
Repercussions.
our own waters.
Oh, okay.
So,
I hear you.
like, how do we speak about the entire ocean? Like,
Mm,
we haven't even figured out our own. And also, like, what's it got to do with us? Right? There's
mm,
all these narratives. So it's been about unpacking all those issues, and also, genuinely speaking, we lack the expertise
I
because
was, yeah.
we haven't invested enough in
Mm,
maritime. I think from the continent you can count on these two hands how many maritime schools we have.
that's deeply concerning.
You
Uh,
can literally count. and
yes.
and you and I studied IR,
Yes.
um undergrad honors. There was never an ocean governance module
Mm.
in when I was studying, right? So
That is quite
all of
shocking,
that,
actually,
yeah,
especially when, like you mentioned, when you've shared here in the conversation how critical
how
um,
critical it
it
is. Yeah.
is. Yeah.
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 So we are where we are, and ratification is important because then it gives you voting power when we get to the COP processes, and
Mm.
you can benefit from the funds that are available
Hmm.
in the space. You can also have decision-making power. You can have equal voting power on certain
Absolutely.
aspects that critically affect your country or your continent. That is very important.
Mm.
And so now there are a bunch of, workshops, awareness raising, capacity
Okay.
building, um, exchanges and things like that to get to a point where, and also even just like from a scientific science policy perspective, we don't have deep sea researchers, for example, or
Mm.
enough for them, I guess.
Can imagine
Um,
that. Yes.
yeah, but I mean, it's a slow turning wheel, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. So marine genetic resources, right? My understanding, again, very layman, my understanding of marine genetic resources, the tension here has been the
Mm,
fact that with a lot of pharmaceutical companies have benefited off of this governance gap, which allowed them to be able to harvest marine genetic, to develop medication, which they were able to patent, and most of the developing world were not able to access this
Yeah.
disinformation, this due to patents. And obviously, this has serious repercussions for healthcare access, which is already a very troubling concern in the developing world. So I say this in the context of the current conversations around the fourth industrial revolution, and also in terms of around AI and this whole conversation around digital public infrastructure,
Mm,
how and essentially how the ocean is really still playing a very massive role in this, in that it houses a lot of these networks, whether it's telecommunication, fiber networks that connects us to the internet, all of
mhm,
that. And then from Southern Africa, as Zambians, we have our economy largely relies on the copper belt region and the copper that we export. We're one of the top exporters of copper in the world.
mm,
And as a land link country, we rely on marine networks, on either side, being an equidistant country between the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. We
mm,
have a historical railway line connecting Zambia's copper belt region, where the copper is mined and other minerals, to the Indian Ocean in Tanzania, which is called Tazara, Tanzania Zambian
mhm,
Railway. And then there's and then of course some of it as well, because of just the poor infrastructure over time, as in it wasn't maintained.
mm,
What has been happening over the past few decades is that there has been a lot more traffic moving these mining resources, this basically these minerals from the Copper Belt
mm,
region in Zambia, the DRC, being brought through Durban, right? The Durban port, so using the road network coming through from Central Southern Africa, and then we have the new corridor connecting inland Africa to the Atlantic Ocean, which is
mm,
the what is currently being built, the Lobito corridor, right?
mhm,
And so we're essentially going to see these three massive corridors, which are going to play a significant role in the economies of these different countries, but not just the countries on the continent, but even in terms of globally, as this then fragments and plays into the current geopolitical tension between and the AI race between the US and China, and basically
mm.
the two global powers i- racing to build the best version of advanced advanced artificial intelligence, whatever that
Anything.
means, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like,
Yeah.
right? But again, we're seeing this whole scramble for Africa, and I guess then my question here then is like, um, does Africa have the digital infrastructure, so in the form of compute, marine data centers, surveillance systems required to implement the required governance systems to be able to manage this and for us to fully leverage this opportunity? I think that we have, instead of us just continuing this really very extractive relationship that has existed for decades already.
Is this in respect to this race, I guess, and where we situate ourselves
Yes,
in terms of okay, cool. So maybe just to touch on the MGR topic that
sure.
you started with, marine genetic resources. So the thing there, and which is why it was a sticky point, was is that, and you said it, right? It is tied to under the BBNJ Treaty.
Hmm.
It has to be these resources, the way we use them, it has to be done through equitable benefit sharing
Hmm.
for all nations,
Hmm.
because these resources don't belong to country X that has the technology right now. And like you said, for a long time, through the use of patents or whatever, it's been the case that only certain researchers or knowledge systems from certain parts of the world are prioritized and therefore are seen as a standard and therefore um, can conduct this kind of research, and therefore the benefits and the copyrights and all of those things and are belong to that part of the world. And then there isn't the usage or the benefits that are derived from this are not shared equitably. And so what this does now is that there's a traceability. These resources come from the deep sea.
Hmm.
Um, this is the network of how it's going to be used, and the sharing of the benefits has to be equitable. right? They refused, them, them, they refused for a
Great
very long
powers.
time. Yeah, that this cannot be the case.
Mm.
So it is to the amazing work of the global community, really, even just the when this treaty was adopted in 2023 in June, it was 36 hours of continuous negotiation, no
Wow.
breaks, right, at the
Yeah.
UN for the text to be accepted,
Hmm.
which is insane after
Quite
20
intense.
years.
Yeah. So that's a
Quite
long time. More than a
intense.
day. Almost
And
2 days.
exactly.
Mm.
So for me now, it is linking it to in a different way your question about capabilities. We have this now. We fought hard and it's here. Let us develop the skills that are necessary to be able to participate in this. So
I like that.
you and I can speak from a policy perspective.
Hmm.
For example, we're going to need scientists, we're going to need marine
Exactly.
biologists,
Hmm.
we're going to need people in pharmaceuticals to
Hmm.
now like own that space,
Yes.
um, to make sure that these things are coming back to us. People in intellectual rights and things like that. All like it's gonna need a whole of society approach to make it work.
Hmm.
And in the same way, a country like Zambia sitting where it sits in the month of November, you had the US, you had the EU, you had the Premier of China visiting Zambia to, finalize the Tazara deal,
Hmm.
revitalization deal. You had the President of Israel visiting
You know,
Zambia. You know,
controversial.
yeah, controversially, you had the likes of Aliko Dangote as
Yes.
well, in 1 month, right?
Not a
So
coincidence at
that
all.
not a coincidence. It shows you just how strategically important
Yeah.
that country is.
Hmm.
Can we can we take advantage of this moment, leverage it to ensure that whatever investments deals are made, that the local beneficiation factor is central to the conversation?
Hmm.
Can we do that? I don't know.
Mm,
Right? That
mm,
is
mm.
that is the
That's a
big
big
question.
question. Yes.
That is the big question because we sitting at a point where they actually need us.
True, true. And you know what?
They-
I'm thinking of the I know
mm,
here in South Africa we have the CSIR, the Council for
yeah,
Scientific
yeah, amazing work
right?
that
They
they
do
do.
amazing and industrial research. And so basically very multidisciplinary and they appreciate the importance of gating expertise and insights from a multidisciplinary perspective from people with different
Yeah.
experience from the different industries. And I think there's a lot, and that's what's lacking, and that's where the world is moving really, is that you cannot just rely on this hyper specialized, just looking at someone who only knows one
Mm,
thing and a capsule thing.
mm,
I guess, and I think this speaks to my what I was going to. I was hoping that we could ground the ending of this conversation is around custodianship.
mm,
Basically, so this is a concept, a legal concept that already exists across different African countries. So we have
mm,
it in Zambia, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Tanzania, in Botswana, and this largely it applies in respect to mineral resources. In that
yeah.
the mineral resources of a country do not belong to they are held in they're held not in ownership to the state, right? But
Mm,
that the state has a responsibility to
mm,
oversee the minerals of that particular country and ensure that their extraction and their use is used to the benefit of its people.
mm,
And you
mm,
mentioned beneficiation, and I know there's a very, very big conversation around resources, natural resources, whether it's land resources or marine resources or just in general in terms of
mm,
how did this benefit our communities and our countries. I know in Zambia what is unique there is that doesn't the custodianship does not lie with the state, but rather it lies with the president, and I think that's a very unique and very distinct form of custodianship.
active.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's also quite interesting as well, that I think we're not talking about enough, and I'm currently thinking through and writing a lot around that, in relation
Mm,
to AI technology. So those of you who are on Substack, or if you don't, I'd strongly advise you to go there. I will leave a link below to share just my current thought process and work that I'm working on and building around custodianship, and how we need to start thinking of how we can best leverage this legal concept of custodianship that already exists within our jurisprudence, and how we
Mm,
can use that to push for development for our respective countries and our regions. And I guess, just, to round that off, I think, you spoke about, we've spoken about this throughout the conversation, that this cannot be done by a specific country alone. Um, does this happen at a continental level in terms of at the AU level, or
mm,
does it happen within regional economic communities or blocks? And I ask this because, I think we tend to just loosely just refer to the continent and just say Africa as though something that can just be easily done, that we can harmonize, and this is actually, is it even realistic? And I think there's a very
mm,
strong argument that it actually isn't, possibly not necessarily realistic for us um to find harmonization across the continent yet. But I think what could possibly be much more easy and easier target to do is to harmonize across regions, because there tends to be a homogeneity around culture, around language, and even just
mm.
relationships between states and state leaders
Yeah,
as well at regional level, than it is
yeah.
if we were to try to do it. I think it's just a very, very far stretch to expect at a continental level yet. Although I think that would be
Mm,
great, but I think maybe, I mean, I'm not trying to impose my view on this, but yeah,
mm.
I think just, someone who not who's doing this work, not just at a continental point of view, but I know you speak and work with colleagues from across the world, and you've mentioned a lot of interaction with people from the Pacific Islands, etc. What do you think, just from those insights and your experience thus far? Do you think that collective negotiation is the way, over fragmented states, and how do we avoid digital sovereignty trap?
Oh, that's a heavy question,
I
Zane.
know, I know it has so many dynamics. I am
So
so sorry, but just go at
let's
what you
let's
can.
take it. I'll give it a jab. Let's take it to international ocean governance first, and maybe from that we can discern some of the things that we could apply from a regional perspective. So you have now, even with the BBNJ Treaty coming into force, implementation coming up, you risks still exist, to persist within the ocean space right now. You have and it's gotten a lot of traction, the
Mhm.
debate on deep sea mining.
Yes.
Yeah, right. You have on one end, because we were mentioning the high seas and international waters, but that's just the water, right?
Mhm.
There's also the seabed,
Oh.
which is a part of these areas beyond national
Hmm.
jurisdiction. And because we're talking about the seabed, it's the seabed and all minerals and resources on it.
Hmm.
So it's your fish, marine, whatever, as well as nodules that contain critical minerals
Yes.
that are, some have argued are required for this green transition.
Hmm.
So if you've noticed now, so there's, because those resources then belong to all of us. Remember, all countries have a
Yes.
say in this,
Hmm.
right? It
Based off
cannot,
of
we
the
cannot,
BBNJ. Hmm.
yeah, based off the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea.
Okay.
Um, and the common heritage of humankind.
Okay.
So that means that no entity, multinational corporation, or country can and should start mining the ocean, or at least the international seabed area, without the consensus of all other countries. You cannot do it, you should not do it unilaterally under
Wait, as
international
in,
law.
so you need consensus from all 200 plus countries in the world before you do that?
You you need so the UN has a regulatory body
Okay.
called the International Seabed Authority
Hmm.
in Jamaica, and this is the mandated UN body under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea
Okay.
to manage the regulations and the use of these resources,
Hmm.
so that it is not a free for all plunder if you've got the technology start.
Hmm.
Otherwise, China, the US would be doing it, and they're trying to get to that just now. But then this would require there are specific safeguards that need to be in place.
Mm.
Environmental impact assessments. If you're sponsoring state, there are certain liabilities that, so if a company, for example, you and I own company X, to stop mining, you cannot, as a private company, we cannot just go into this area and stop mining because it doesn't belong to us, belongs to all states.
Hmm.
You have to be sponsored by a state,
Wow.
right? And so mining in international waters hasn't started yet.
Okay.
But there was a company called TMC, the Metals company. It's a Canadian company that was sponsored by, I can say, I'm not a diplomat. They convinced Nauru, a tiny Pacific island state, which had done some hectic or bad economic choices in terms of land-based mining under the structure adjustment programs in the 90s or whatever. So basically they cash strapped and desperate. And they don't have any resource because it's a tiny island. So they got Nauru to sponsor them to stop mining. So under international law, that would trigger a 2-year process for this
TMC.
rules and regulations to mine this area to be completed by the International Seabed Authority.
Mm.
But that process is not done because there's so many risks and so many issues that countries do not agree on yet. So negotiations are ongoing
Okay.
for that. And in the meantime, because this company had invested so much money, billions of money
Hmm.
of dollars into the technology because they were promised that mining would start. And now because the negotiation process is taking long, what do? Because the US is not a party and member of the International Seabed Authority, and it's not a party to the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. They signed, but they didn't ratify because they had ambitions, right? So this company has decided that this international multilateral process is taking too long. What we're going to do is going to take advantage of the Trump moment and go and apply for a license to the US. And there was
Mm.
an executive order earlier in the year by the White House to expedite, basically ordering US relevant authorities to expedite the process to
Hmm.
give a green light for this to start happening, right? So now the international community is saying, no, you cannot start unilateral mining. So all of that is happening,
There's a
and
lot.
it speaks to the concept of custodianship as well.
Yes.
Yes. In the way that you put it, who do these resources belong to,
Exactly. Hmm. And who
right?
oversees them as well,
And who
right?
oversees them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
And
I
that's
think the
that's
conversation
that's
is
the
also,
big question.
yeah.
And it's linked to what we're talking about because if you look at it from an ego's perspective, um, under the Trump administration, they're trying to annex Greenland for
Mhm.
what?
For
Resources, right?
resources.
They are trying to Ukraine,
Venezuela.
same demand,
Yes.
right? Venezuela.
DRC.
DRC, that
Hmm.
security for minerals deal,
Yes.
Libido
Lobito.
corridor now is being expedited.
Yes.
And all that is to counter China's dominance
Yes.
in terms of access to critical minerals, the markets themselves, as well as advancements in AI technologies, because you
Hmm.
need all of this stuff, right? And the trade war and all of that stuff, it's all interconnected.
Hmm.
It's a messed up network of bad things happening. Um, and so we're at a place where all that is happening. From one side, it's really bad for the world. And then on the other side, it is an opportunity for African countries, but it has to be opportunity that comes with responsibility,
Hmm.
right? And not
And
just
whose responsibility?
yes, whose
Important.
responsibility. And our governments should really adhere to those considerations. But us as people as well need to hold our governments
Absolutely.
accountable
As an electorate, right?
as an electorate,
Yeah.
but we're not doing that.
But I mean,
It
yeah.
is, yes, I mean, it's happening, but these conversations are happening and these privileged
very high
spaces,
level.
right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. And I think that,
Uh,
that's, I think, sorry, I think I just want to like
yeah,
step in here. I'm so sorry. I don't
yes.
mean to speak over you, but I think that's such a really important point. And for
Mm,
me, that's why Strangers X exists, in that I'm trying to bring these
cloud.
conversations like this.
Yeah.
I've been having conversations like this for a very long time because I'm a governance
Mm,
enthusiast, and and these are
mm,
questions that really bother me, and this is what keeps me up at night, during the day
mm,
and morning. But it has not been enough for me to just hear that, oh, there's nothing we can do about improving
mm,
political will or even
mm.
having an informed electorate, etc. And I think that's just
Citizenry, yeah.
ridiculous, especially when we have this technology, we have social media, people,
Yeah.
we are able to get people's attention, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I'm doing it, I have mastered it yet, but I'm trying to
Mm,
fight to figure out,
mm,
how do we
mm, mm.
use what we have, these resources, these phones that we have,
Yeah.
right? To try and inform and conscientize and inform our electorates across. I'm an African, so I'm
Yeah.
interested in Africans, not just on the continent, but even in the diaspora, and of course, it means even just our global community. How can
Mm.
we do that by bringing these conversations that happen within policy spaces into the global,
Into, yeah.
into the public space, into the civic space? Because when people know and understand what is at stake, they can then hold politicians accountable to say, "Hey,
Mm,
what is your policy on marine security or marine
mm.
development or just marine or blue economy development?" I come from a coastal city, or I'm a landlocked city. These are the considerations.
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned that, because politicians will only be able to speak and
To
prioritize those
speak
things
to the extent that they're held
that they're
accountable.
held accountable. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is
And
such an underexploited
it is, and you
opportunity.
raise such a good point. We are seeing almost a wave of a conscientization of people around these issues. I mean, especially with the use of digital technologies,
Absolutely.
even the wave of unconstitutional changes
Mm-hmm.
of power
Yes.
in West Africa.
Yes.
Primarily, it is around some of these issues, right? There's no accountability,
Mm-hmm.
and it's young people. We always say, 60% of Africa is under 25. And I've gotten to a point where I don't even like hearing that
It's
because,
all
okay, so
heartbreaking.
what? Right?
Like, what is
It's
it,
like,
what is it doing for us?
what does
Because
it
we're
mean?
still being led by
What
people
does
who are
it
fighting
exactly?
colonial
What
wars.
does it mean? And how do we, if for me, when you say majority of Africans
Ah,
are
young
young
people.
people, it shouldn't be that we're still speaking about the inclusion of young people in
No.
governance spaces. It doesn't make logical sense because it should be young people in
Who
these
should be leading? Yes,
positions.
yes, yes.
Exactly.
Predominantly, not the only ones, but they should be, and
Predominantly,
yes,
yes,
there should be
an
a healthy mix.
intergenerational
Yes,
approach, right?
yes.
And so, but I am happy when you see, for example, in the Seychelles election not
Yeah.
long ago in October, it was tight, it went to a second round.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the sticky points, right? I mean, they have their own context in the issues, drugs, and so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And this is um, on the Human Development Index. This
Mm-hmm.
is one of the highest
Very
ranking
concerning.
countries. It is doing so well
Yeah.
throughout the multiple administrations on so
Mm-hmm.
many fronts, but they have issues, drug use, etc., and whatever. And interestingly, Seychelles as well is, I mean, it's got a small population, but it is one of the most literate countries in Africa, in the world, even. I think it's about 96%,
That's a very
right?
impressive statistic. Mhm.
And do you know what one of the heaviest sticky points in the election was? It was about the leasing of a part of the Assumption Island to a Qatari businessman to build this
Yes,
massive
yes.
resort
Mm-hmm.
hotel
Mm-hmm.
on a UN
Mandated.
protected site.
Yes,
Yeah, mandated protected
mandate.
site. Yeah, and or was it heritage site? One of
Yes.
the two. Um, and that for me, to have issues like that, climate issues, ocean issues,
To be center.
be a big part, front and center of an election
Big
in
ups to
Africa,
Seychelles and the young people of
that is
Seychelles.
progress.
That is.
That is progress.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need.
Mm.
We need, like even now back home, for you and I, the conversations that are
Around.
happening the demonstrations about
Yes.
young people
Institutional.
that were promised that they would benefit from a certain mountain of
Yes.
resources or whatever.
Yes.
Well, that might look like it's one isolated incident, right? Even
So
historically,
connected.
the Black Mountain stuff, well, it might look like, okay, it's just a group of young people that are um, street guys
They can
who
easily be labeled
who
as these are
people,
just,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
bad
thieves and thugs
actors,
or whatever it is,
yeah,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah. Sorry, I'm
But
just for
it is,
context for people who are not Zambian. We were talking about
yeah,
um I think the general term is referred to as artisanal miners.
artisanal mind, yeah,
Yes, so this is not just unique to just like, for instance, like I know this is a very big conversation happening right now in South Africa with
yeah,
current changes to the to the legislation around trying to legitimize and bring in licensing around that aspect to combat illegal mining. So in Zambia,
mm,
we also have a similar issue, and this is not just a unique thing to a specific country, but just across the
yeah,
world.
across
Yes,
the
across
board,
the world. And so there's this site called the Black Mountain, which is essentially a
the
mining
dump
dump
site,
site, where mines have just been dumping, but of course there's also leftover residue minerals and resources that can still be mined quite easily. And so there's a lot of illegal mine that happens there, and of course there's a whole lot of syndicates that's involved there, etc. And there's been a lot of. I will try and share
yeah.
some links below just for
And in the
better.
DRC, you know, you
Yeah.
see all these youths that are going to basically doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's easy for us to categorize them as thugs or thieves or whatever the word may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's for me, the fundamental question is, this is a message. These people are basically
Beneficiation.
saying, but yeah, exactly.
The
We
same
have these
conversation we're talking
resources.
about the Red Sea, right? About the whole quote
Yes.
unquote piracy, you know?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Same thing on
Same thing.
land. It's these resources, as we understand it, are ours. They
Hmm.
belong to Zambia and the Zambian people.
And the
We do not
Congolese
see the
people and the,
benefits.
yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
whatever context, whatever country, we do not see the benefits.
Hmm.
We do not see it as a country, and so we are going to find ways
Yeah,
to to benefit
to do
in
that. Yeah.
however little, however dangerous
Hmm.
and risky it is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so it is high time, honestly, our leaders face reality. And all of us have a duty to not just to ourselves, to our countries, our continent,
Yeah.
but to future inhabitants of
Yes.
this land
Seventh
that we
generation.
yeah that we call home, to do right. We cannot be that way. You and I, Zane, are having this conversation, or our kids and 50 children's children are
You
having
know?
this very conversation 50 years from now. We would have failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
would have failed.
It
and
really would
and
have. It really is a
yeah,
moral imperative.
it
Uh,
is.
and I think as Africans, like we mentioned, we spoke about this just quite briefly initially, that for us, life and living is not just the physical. It's not just,
Yeah.
yourself as an individual. Um,
Mm.
in the
It's
same way
all
how
interconnected.
we can talk about the importance of community and people and
Mm.
ensuring that everyone's dignity and well-being is protected and preserved and encouraged. It also just goes beyond in terms of, I always quote the line from Lion King called The Circle of Life. I really find the movie Lion King as just
That's the
like a
one.
deeply philosophical
Yeah,
movie.
that's the one.
That really everything is so interconnected, and
Mm.
um you cannot boast about your development as an individual if it comes at the cost of another human being, or even at the
Yep.
cost of the environment, and that also includes, land and water, and even
Mm.
for future episodes I will be speaking to some space expert space governance people, because the new frontier is not just, we often talk or just think about it in terms of land, and I love the fact that here we've brought it to the ocean, but there's also the same
Space
conversation
as
is
well.
actually
In
happening as well
space.
in space
Yeah.
as well. And then
Mm.
there's, of course, there's the cloud as well. So it's really just really fascinating, important, necessary conversations that need to be brought out of these privileged
Mm. Mm,
exclusive spaces that are really important, that do affect us on the day to day, into the public, so the public knows as to what is it that is at stake, what, you can actually find out and learn more about it. And even as a young person thinking
mm,
about a career, thinking about what is that you want to focus on, what it is that you want to improve on. I'm not saying everyone should become a governance expert, but even, let's say, if you're an innovator, if you're an
mm,
entrepreneur, if you're a
mm.
creative, all of these things, you are a product of your environment and what it is that you're trying to solve. And so the more you
Absolutely.
think about what it is that, the issues that they are, the better and more nuanced and the more unique, as everyone was trying to be unique. And that's not a bad thing. But
Mm.
yeah, basically just learn more, read more, speak to a whole lot more diverse voices and expertise.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's so much untapped potential
So much.
um,
Especially on the continent.
on the continent that all of us can be absolutely anything. Like there's so many examples of shining stars
Yeah.
from the continent. I mean, just imagine, somebody mentioned the other day, Davido's following on social media
Yes.
is 174 million people.
That's a lot
That
of
is
people. That is so
twice the
powerful.
population of South Africa,
Yeah. I mean, and this is the
an
biggest economy on the
entire
continent.
country, right?
Twice.
So imagine for me in terms of messaging how powerful that is.
Hmm.
Like it's amazing. Like that guy, what's his name? Kabi Lamy?
Oh,
The
Kabi Lame. Yes, 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 yes,
Yeah,
yes. The
like
Italian guy. Yes, the one who
yes,
doesn't
yes.
speak. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Him.
yeah.
Like all that for me, it's there's so many things that we can do, so many voices that we have, so many ways of expressions
Mm.
that it's impossible to silence us,
True,
right? There's
true.
it's impossible
And we
and
really
so
do
many
create internet culture as well, right? And I
yes.
think while it's great for art in that we're doing that a lot, whether it's in the music scene, fashion scene, I think you're seeing
Mm,
a lot of African creatives really exciting, and it makes us all really proud as how much that is happening in terms of how we're dictating
mm,
global pop youth culture.
mm.
You know,
So
imagine
imagine
if we could
saying
harness that
Yeah,
to
imagine
improve
Zain,
our thing.
if you were having in terms of just spreading this message
Mhm.
and the conversation that we're having, imagine if on the other side of this call is Davido and however many followers that he has are listening, and that
Light your
is
speed.
that is a job or a pathway that governments can't do.
No.
They
That's
can't
the kind
achieve
of
that.
reach that countries,
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, do not have
Yeah.
that kind of access. They don't.
So there's so much for us to do in the space for everyone.
True.
We cannot be overcrowded. There's space for everyone,
Hmm.
and we need to carry as many people along as we can. I'm so happy we had this conversation
Thank you. Thank you.
because I mean it's rare these days because I mean we're so in our corners. I get sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, it is so depressing.
Yeah.
There's
You
so
keep
much to
meeting the
do.
same people at all these
It's
convenings.
exactly.
It's like we're talking to ourselves here, guys.
We're preaching to the choir. So I
Mhm.
haven't had a conversation like this where I'm like, wow, I feel inspired. I need to go work. I need to go do more. I need to go connect this to this or connect this person to that person to push this agenda. So thank you so much. I
Yeah.
really, really do appreciate this.
No, thank you. Thank you. Honestly, thank you. I really, it really just, highlights what it is I've been trying to do. And I know, like you mentioned, there really has been this wave of conscientization. I think a lot of us, a lot of young people are realizing that, there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to be done, and it is happening,
Mm,
especially with a lot of around digital media, and that's really, really incredible. And I think if we can have as diverse as possible as voices, and even if you think, oh my God, someone has already talked about this, no, you bring in your
mm,
insights, and I think there's always just different contexts, and this is not the full conversation around maritime security or maritime or blue economy conversations and governance,
there's
and
so much more.
there's so much
Yeah.
more, and I know for sure you definitely will be back.
We
Um,
need a full day. Like even now, I'm thinking of so many things that we need to, and I'm like, we need a circle, we need a fireside chat
We
for
do.
this.
We do, we
You
do,
know,
we
we
do.
need a
And you know what?
book.
And I don't, I'm not the type of person who says we do and I don't follow through, in the sense that
Yeah.
that needs to happen somewhere. Like we need to actually be actively thinking about like what does that look like? What I,
I will commit to that as
yes,
well.
it's
I will commit to
exactly,
that.
exactly. I
Yeah.
think that's something we need to take with from these conversations, and
Yeah.
keep that in mind what we've just said here, and
Mm.
and I say even to the audience as well. I wish we could go on forever. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Please, 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 I think to the audience as well, please continue the conversation. Feel free to share your questions, any rebuttals, any concerns,
Mm.
whatever, any additional insights that you think would be really valuable. Please do share it in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much. That's it for today's episode of Strangers X. It's something stirred your thinking, made you uncomfortable, or gave you hope. Share this with a friend or a colleague. You can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're building something courageous in the global majority, reach out. Please do. We want to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay in community. Remember, governance is about building community. Thank you.